Hey there and welcome. I'm Liz here with Eric.
Hey, Liz.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we are talking about how to judge others because we're so good at
Yeah,
it.
that's right. That's fair.
I feel like we all feel like we're pretty good at judging other people,
Yeah,
right?
and we all have felt judged by other people too. So I
That's
think there's a
true.
lot of judging going around.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we got to hear from you and just talking all about the perspective and the lens on which we should look through and how to take that word. And tell me a little bit about that word. You talked about judging and how we can also be condemning in a way as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's interesting because the word judging, both in English and then also, the Bible was written in different languages, including Greek. So the Bible word for judge also has the same kind of breadth of it. Like sometimes it can mean evaluate and discern, making a call on something, and then sometimes it can mean like condemnation and kind of, and so judging kind of encompasses that whole thing.
Right.
And so it's like, well, there are some aspects of judging that are probably pretty healthy, and there's
Right.
probably some aspects of judging that are not. But when you use the word judge, you kind of have to clarify a bit what you mean by it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that word is thrown around so much now. Like, hey, don't judge me.
Yeah.
Or, it's said so much. But I feel like when you say the word condemnation, you just think of
That
something
sounds harsh.
totally, something really bad. And I loved how you were talking about all the court shows that you watched.
Yeah.
Because I was a people's court girl myself.
Yes.
So,
So Judge Wapner, or was it?
you know what? She was red hair.
Okay, so that's the recent one. It's sad that I know all of this,
Okay.
but
Well,
yeah.
I did love
Yeah.
People's Court,
Yeah.
and I know. Dun, 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 dun,
Yep.
dun. Anyways, but when you were talking about it, kind of reminded me when you had said about when you judge others, you will also be judged. You know, the phrase came to me of, and I've never been arrested before, but when they read you the Miranda, when they read you the Miranda rights of like anything you say or do will be held against you in a court of law or whatever, and it's kind of like, hey, like that is kind of the verse that you talked about in the Bible is like, hey, whatever you say is also going to be put back to you. You know,
whatever you dish out is likely to come back your way.
Right.
Which is, I mean, it is an interesting phrase that, like even in that passage that Jesus talks about, do not judge, and it's like the same way you judge other people will come back at you. And I do think part of that is, hey, if I treat people unfairly, if I put people in a box or I'm harsh and critical with them, part of what Jesus is saying is I shouldn't be surprised if that comes back my way, you know?
Yeah. And it's so hard to like see yourself, right? Because you were talking about what should be obvious to us is sometimes the most oblivious.
Yeah.
Did I get there?
You did get it right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
And I was thinking like, because we don't look in the mirror all day. Like we're not standing in front of a mirror just like talking to ourselves, right? So we don't see the things that other people see. You know, talk to me a little bit about that. And I mean, how do we start seeing ourselves in a way that is better, like how people will see us?
Well, it's a scary thought, right? I mean, and it comes from that funny image that Jesus uses in that same passage where he talks about, you're complaining about or critiquing someone or even offering advice about a speck in their eye, and yet Jesus is like, you're a hypocrite. You've got a plank, like a beam in your own eye, and that's meant to be a joke, like to make us laugh, because it's this idea of this person walking around with a beam in their eye, let alone giving advice to other people. And so the scary thought of that I've wrestled with is it does mean that, hey, there is a potential, and even a better than a potential, that there is something that everybody else kind of sees in me that I'm oblivious to, and that there are things that maybe people are feeling in a room when I walk into that room that I think I don't feel or I don't sense. And so I think the start of that is kind of, and why Jesus is such a master communicator, is it's kind of like part of it's just a recognition that, hey, that's possible. Like, and I think as I was wrestling with that text, it's to say, okay, I really need to think about that. Like, what could that be? Is there something like that? And being open to it. And then I think it requires radical candor from people. It's really uncomfortable, but it's saying, hey, if there's something that is obvious to everybody else in the room and I might not know about it,
Yes.
do I have the courage to create space for people to share that with me?
Right. Yeah, that's
and
hard.
that's hard. That's really, really hard. It takes a lot of courage, but it's something that if we're not doing more of, like, we're actually like limiting ourselves.
Yeah.
It's scary. Like, even with, like, whenever we do messages at Chase Oaks, like, we do a lot of feedback, which is hard because, I only want to hear the good feedback, but it's saying that, hey, there is something that perhaps what I'm saying or the way I'm coming across that I don't see, that I need to trust that other people do see and listen to them when they tell that to me.
Yeah, and that's really hard to do. I know you talked about the 3 ways of growing in more of discernment rather than judgment.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, real quick, those 3 ways that you feel is just going to help us.
Yeah, and I like the discernment word because I think, again, it is a form of judging. But when Jesus says "do not judge," I don't think he's saying that. I do think he's saying, "Hey, don't condemn people. Like, don't make a final
don't look at
yeah,
it
don't
and be like, oh, you didn't brush your hair today.
Like, and Judge Judy, that's great, like what she does, but I shouldn't have that posture most of the time. Like, I shouldn't go around saying like, this is what you're doing wrong. Yeah, like, to remove the hammer. But discernment is this idea, and I love the word because it's about evaluating, but it's a process. It's not a one-time, like, I have discernment, you don't have discernment. It's actually moving from, like, confusion to clarity, which is a process and it takes time. And so when we talked about it, I think there are 3 different places that we just kind of constantly need to grow in discernment. I think there's God discernment, to say, hey, our relationship with God is a relationship. So it's not like, oh, I have this verse and I can just throw this out at people. It's saying, I need to be constantly in relationship with God to say, God, what is true and what's false, and what is helpful and harmful, and not just feel like I own all of that, to say, God, help me get better at that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a God discernment piece. I think there's a self-discernment piece that's kind of that plank in the eye of like, all right, I need to keep growing in who I am. And even the idea that Jesus is saying, hey, before you look to judge or evaluate other people, like, evaluate yourself. So I need to grow in self-discernment. But then all that is done with the heartbeat that we do care about people in our life. Like, if you see someone that's going down a bad path, like, the loving thing to do is not to say, hey, go off the cliff. It is to say, okay, I need to have discernment in how to engage that relationship with truth and with love and all of that.
Yeah. Because I know you talked about perspective and people's story and really understanding them before kind of diving into that as well. Like, putting on those 3D glasses of like, okay, how do they see the world? What have their experiences been? And then you can have more discernment and wisdom and how to come around what that looks like to help them grow, instead of just, having a judgment session on, hey, this is what you need to do.
Like, when Jesus talks about it, he's like, hey, then you'll be able to see clearly to help your brother. And so I love that. It's like, because I think sometimes in our culture, we just get so good at, like, on social media or like, we talk about people, but we don't talk with people. And
sure.
we minimize people to where we have all these opinions that we're just kind of throwing out there. And I think when Jesus is saying, like, hey, the baseline needs to be that I need to be very careful when I decide to step in to offer help to someone. Like, my baseline actually needs to be like, I probably need to be really cautious about that. And the first thing I need to do is like, no, I actually just need to work really hard on myself. But then if I decide to step out, then it is done in relationship. It's done with a lot of care, where I've really worked to remove the contempt in my heart. That's tricky, you know?
Totally. And I feel like social media is one of those things too that just makes it way easier for us to just like,
and they're on a screen, you're like, well,
you can type whatever you want. And so I'm sure that just hasn't helped, and you can kind of hide behind that as well. And I feel like that's where there's can be just things said that is not Jesus, like, wouldn't be what Jesus would say, or isn't Jesus like loving to other people. So it's just a good reminder to just think through those lenses and perspectives of, like, the other person on the other side of the camera, and we have no idea who they are or what they've been through too, so we can judge lot. So, Eric, is there a time that, you felt judged, or there was just this experience that you think about when you think about this message? And
Yeah, I almost included it. There was a foundational moment in my life was it was back when I was in college, and it was part of the University of California system, and they sent different students would go from California to Washington D.C. kind of study abroad without going abroad, and so with that, like I had a perspective of like what I thought about politics and worldview and all that, but what I found was on that trip, almost everybody else was from the other side, like just a completely different worldview and political view and all of that. So I remember it was just interesting because I hadn't been in a situation where I had the minority view. I'd been mostly around people that agreed with me.
yeah.
And so I remember going on this, that like there was one time it was a lunch and we were talking about different issues, and it was judging, but it was almost like, oh, you're really cute. Like they were poking me of like, what, does someone really believe that?
Yeah.
And I just felt really minimized because of my views, but also my faith. But on the flip side, like I think it exposed me too, that when I looked at people that thought differently than me, I had kind of lumped them into a box. So that semester was pretty formational because it was a chance where some people I kind of felt judged and we didn't really connect, but there were others that were vastly different from me, but we actually did get to know each other's stories, and that changed my life. It didn't honestly change a lot of my views, but it changed how I talked about them.
Right.
And it's what kind of drove me to go down the ministry route, because it's like, man, I think there's all these different views that are out there. I'd rather start up here and talk about God and faith and connecting with people, and then some of this other stuff will sort itself out. So yeah, it was both a negative story and a positive one for me.
And also it reminds me of what you said, like talk with people.
Yeah.
There's some of those phrases that I feel like even when you want to understand, just like, hey, help me like understand this, or help me understand your perspective,
it's a good,
or tell me more about that, is one phrase that I've learned. Good. It's just like thinking more about how can I understand, your perspective. Like you said, it's just getting to know that person on a deeper level, and then the trust and the foundation and the feedback and just helping each other grow will always be a little bit easier, I feel like, at the end of the day with the discernment. So thanks, Eric. That was awesome. I appreciate it. Is there anything last that you would want to say? I don't want to...
No, I just think I liked what your point was of just being genuinely curious with people, as opposed to lumping people into categories of, I love those phrases. I've been impacted by that too, of saying, hey, I need to walk in, and the phrase like help me understand, or even when we say the phrase I don't understand, it's like, well, who has the issue? Well, I do. Like I'm the one that doesn't understand. And so I think what Jesus calls us to do is like, well, before I just make a quick opinion about it, it's like I need to try my best to understand as best as I can a person who's coming from a different perspective, and I think it's a very healthy way to approach it.
Yeah, I know. It's just like always remembering that before we go to that straight away.
Yeah.
We are the judge. I want that.
Judge Liz has a good a gavel. I mean, that would be pretty powerful.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Eric. That was an awesome message. And if you didn't hear Eric's message, you can always go to our website and hear it. But we're so glad that you joined us this weekend. I'm telling you, next week Jeff is going to talk about some swines and
pearls and swine.
I don't know
I'm glad I didn't get it.
It's going to be an awesome time, so you're going to want to check that out next week. But if you want to come visit us at a campus, we'd love for you to come here. You can always check us out at the website. Should be down below, and we'll see you then. Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.